Good morning, Liberty. It is Wednesday morning. March 20th, 2019. My name is Michael Bolden, broadcasting live from my home office and studio in a spare bedroom converted for this purpose for the 10th Amendment Center here in downtown Los Angeles, 9:30 a.m. Pacific time on the West Coast. So good morning to you, good afternoon, good evening, whether you happen to be watching live right now through YouTube, Facebook, Periscope, or if you're tuning in later on in the archive on any of those platforms or anywhere else that we share this video, or through the podcast at iTunes and elsewhere. I really appreciate you spending a little time with me today. Thank you so much. Now, in this episode, I want to talk about 3D printed firearms and what governments at both the state and federal level are doing on this. And it doesn't really look good from my vantage point. And I do want to start out with a quick caveat. For me and for our work at the 10th Amendment Center, the right to keep and bear arms is a natural right. It is not gifted to you by government. It doesn't come from a piece of paper. Nothing. And any restriction on that right to keep and bear arms is a violation of your natural rights. So I like to set aside the phrase Second Amendment rights. I know a lot of gun rights supporters actually refer to gun rights or the right to keep and bear arms as Second Amendment rights. And I urge everyone who does that to stop. I will not do that, and if I do, you should call me out. Second Amendment rights gives the implication that your rights come from a piece of paper or it comes from government. And in fact, I see a lot of memes on social media, Facebook pretty regularly, where people post something that says, this is the only gun permit I need, and it's a picture of the Second Amendment. Well, the Second Amendment isn't giving you permission. And in fact, by claiming that the Second Amendment gives you permission to have a right to defend yourself, your property, and your family, whatever it may be, defend whatever you choose that you're going to defend, that means you are empowering politicians to define what those phrases, those words mean in that document. So don't empower the bad guys by using bad terminology. Also, one other piece that I do like to mention is that many gun rights supporters from the conservative end of the spectrum, there aren't as many from the left, but there are some. For example, I recently started following on Twitter the Socialist Rifle Association. And maybe I probably disagree with everything they talk about economically, but they don't really post that. They are really hardcore on the right to keep and bear arms. And I had a friend who lived in Berkeley for many years. I'm in Southern California, not much different, but who lived in Berkeley, would refer to many people on the left coming all the way around saying, yeah, of course we have to have the right to keep and bear arms. The workers, they need to be armed. So it's funny how sometimes you can have a convergence, but you don't have to have people agree with you on everything. You don't have to agree with you on religion, on economics, on politics, on anything. If they're okay with you on the right to keep and bear arms, be okay with them on that and find common ground and be different from them everywhere else. That's fine. So one thing that many on the right have done for years, and it's kind of going away, is that they've actually empowered the federal government, they've empowered state governments, they've empowered local governments to ban a firearm for the mere crime of owning it. Now, if you believe in liberty, you believe that you own yourself, you own property, you believe in property rights. And what you own, or what you eat, what you consume, for example, what you put in your own body, isn't a crime. The only crimes that can happen are what you do to other people. Fraud, violence, theft, things like that. All the things that government does, for example. So when you empower government to ban or to criminalize the ownership of a product, and in this case I'm referring, I know some people probably know where I'm going with this, but to the cannabis plant. When you empower government to ban you or criminalize you for owning something, other people are going to use that same principle to ban you from owning something you want. So even if you don't like cannabis or marijuana and don't want to own it, you should never, never encourage government to put people in jail for merely owning something or conducting commerce, free exchange of money for a product or for a service. Because otherwise other people are going to say, whoa, I like that idea. And maybe they didn't get it from cannabis prohibition. Maybe they got it from somewhere else, but the principle is the same. So I wanted to get that out of the way. Now, before going over to the actual reports that I want to cover today, I want to say hi to some good friends out in the live chat. I'm trying to use a new application through the service Restream.io, which allows us to broadcast to these multiple channels simultaneously. So hopefully the chat application is working well. I see some people from YouTube, from Facebook, Ward Lawrence, Woodsider, Alan Mosley, my buddy who has the Gold Standard podcast, Justin Bayola, Joe Standridge, Tyler B. I hope you're doing well. I know Tyler has just had like the 20th surgery of his life. So hopefully you're doing well, Tyler. Robert Sanderson, good to see you. Dennis Marburger over on Facebook saying onward and upward, up for nullification. And Alice on Facebook, Anna Rays, Jay Armstrong, so many people. I'm going to try my best to keep up with as many of the comments as possible, but I know some people on the podcast version don't want to hear me just rambling through. I appreciate everyone joining me here today. So let's get into some of the reports here and some of the bad news. Now, I like to focus most of the time on positive things. The vast majority of what government does in modern times, and if you're watching our social posts, you'll see, for example, on Facebook, Twitter, and Minds.com, even on Gab.ai early this morning, we posted a meme that said unconstitutional. It listed a bunch of stuff that the federal government does that shouldn't be done under the Constitution, or at least done by the federal government. And it's impossible to list all the things that the federal government does that violates the Constitution. If you look at the original Constitution, the original legal meaning, the intent of the drafters, and the legal meaning implemented by the people who gave it legal force, that is the ratifiers, the people of the several states, I would say you would be easily in the ballpark if you literally just said everything that the federal government does is unconstitutional. You'll be wrong maybe 5 or 10% of the time, and you'd get a 90% score. I mean, if I went through college and got 90% on everything that I did, I would have been a superstar. So let's go with just referring to everything they do as unconstitutional, and we'll take some errors in there because we're human. So let's look at this first one. And I don't know where I was going with that, but most of what they do is garbage, but I do like to focus on the few positive things that we find because we want to advance liberty. It's really easy to complain and get caught in a negative circle, but today I've got a lot of negative stuff to share. I apologize for that. This first one comes from Maryland. Surprise, surprise, gun grabbers in Maryland. The House of Delegates okays bills requiring long gun background checks and banning 3D printed guns. Now, I'm just mentioning the long gun background checks because it's bad, and it is the title of the article, but it's not something that I'm going to cover in any detail today. I want to focus on the 3D printed guns. And here's from the report yesterday in the Baltimore Sun. The Maryland House of Delegates gave final approval Monday to bills that would ban 3D printed guns and require background checks for all sales of long guns, such as shotguns and rifles. The bills are among the priorities of gun control advocates, but just as strongly opposed by gun rights supporters. After the background check bill was approved on a 90-49 vote, an observer in the House balcony shouted, "We will not comply." I can only imagine what would have happened had this happened in Maryland at the time of the founding. If they had passed something like this, would there have been one person saying we will not comply? No, I love the fact that someone did that. But the fact that it was only one person yelling, according to this report, maybe there were more and they're trying to diminish that to discourage activists. But if this is to be believed, and a lot of times we know that we can't believe these people, but if it is to be believed and there's only one person saying we will not comply, that in and of itself is a serious problem. But going further, the 3D printed gun bill prohibits buying, selling, or owning a gun, even merely just owning it. Not using it. Again, goes back to the principle of they're criminalizing you for what you own, not your actions, not what you do. They criminalize you for potential thought crime, for future crime, what you could do with something later on. And if you guys are hearing some construction behind me, especially those of you who are joining me for the first time on Facebook, I've been going through a long period of construction right below me. It doesn't seem too bad today, but I want to apologize for that while it's going on below my feet here. So the 3D gun bill prohibits all this. Owning by a computer-aided fabricated device. unless it has a federal serial number. They want to centralize control and restriction over the right to keep and bear arms in Washington, D.C. And I think that is a very, very bad choice. Violations would be a misdemeanor punishable by up to 5 years in prison and a fine up to $5,000. The 3D ban was approved by a 94 to 45 vote. That's Maryland. That's yesterday that they're trying to ban this. Now, when I read the Second Amendment, I don't read it as saying the right to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed unless we don't know you have the gun. I mean, that's not what it says. It just says the right to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed, and then there's a period. It doesn't say unless. There's no caveat. There's no but. And what these people are doing, the people who take this type of approach, are looking at this right to keep and bear arms. Now, I know people like my friend Suzanne Sherman, Mike Meharry, and many others who write for the 10th Amendment Center, who do research. Mike does a lot of reporting. And then, of course, Dave Benner. They may correct me at this point regarding the incorporation doctrine. I'm going to set that aside for another show. But if we're literally just thinking about the principle that we don't want to infringe the right to keep and bear arms, and we're looking to the Second Amendment as that principle, many of the states actually have good text on the right to keep and bear arms in their state constitution. But if we think about that, there is no but. It doesn't say if we can't find it. And I think that's really problematic to have this type of attitude. Another bill in Rhode Island, I believe it's up for a hearing this week, from State Senator Cynthia Coyne. She introduced a bill to ban 3D-printed firearms in the state. It would make it illegal in Rhode Island for any person to manufacture, import, sell, ship, deliver, possess, transfer, or receive any firearm that is made from plastic, fiberglass, or through a 3D printing process. It doesn't matter how you do it, how you get it, how you own it, buy, sell, transfer, whatever, what materials. But if it comes from a 3D printer, it's bad. Basically, the idea that you can create your own self-defense is bad. Now, I know many gun rights supporters, same ones said the same thing about the bump stock ban. I don't care about it, they'll tell me. They don't care. It's a kiddie toy. It's not good. It's not effective. It's not safe. Why do I want that? I don't need it. Well, not complaining about your rights because you don't want it is only empowering them to use that same power against you in another area. And that goes back to my commentary regarding banning a plant, for example. So in Rhode Island, they're looking for violations to get 10 years in prison and up to $10,000 in fine for the mere crime of owning something that the government can't find necessarily. But this isn't just proposals. There's a bill on the books already. It was just signed this last fall in New Jersey. Again, surprise, surprise, where these are coming from and these reports are coming from, because there is a really bad mentality in a lot of these areas. I think it's actually a bad mentality all over the place. And this report came out on Monday. 12 arrested in bust of alleged Camden County ghost gun assault rifle ring. So Governor Phil Murphy, according to this report, this is from the Philadelphia Inquirer, because, of course, it goes into interstate reporting. Phil Murphy signed a law last November banning the purchase of firearms parts used to make untraceable weapons, sometimes called ghost guns. In many states, they require no ID verification, no date of birth confirmation, and no background check. Of course, they don't like the idea, the gun grabbers don't like the idea that you can defend yourself without getting government approval. Now, again, the right to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed, period. Not it shall not be infringed as long as the government says it's okay for you. That is not a right. When a right is only exercised based on permission for government, it is a privilege, and that privilege can be taken away. So they go on to say the investigation was not limited to New Jersey. During the probe, investigators learned of an alleged plan to circumvent the New Jersey law by having guns shipped to Bensalem, Bucks County. I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing that correctly. Last week, they ramped it up. They did this arrest, and they say here, the Attorney General says, this case starkly illustrates why ghost guns are so dangerous, because drug dealers and other criminals can easily acquire them and traffic them into our communities, where they will be virtually untraceable if used in a crime. And of course, they always threaten you with criminals, terrorism, It's all these scare tactics. If Obamacare wasn't passed, millions of people were going to die in the streets. When the Patriot Act was passed, it was only going to be used for terrorists. When the income tax was passed, it was only going to be a couple of percent for a short term on the top earners, and we know how that all plays out. So supposedly just going after criminals and drug dealers. Now, mind you, most drug laws shouldn't exist either, especially on the federal level, if we're talking constitutionally. When they say it's only going to be used for these people, eventually other politicians are going to use it for things that you want to do. So don't ever give them that baseline. So again, that's not the only one. So another bill that we're covering again is in Connecticut, House Bill 7219. This is sponsored again by 19 Democrats and 1 Republican. I'm curious to see who the Republican gun grabber is. A lot of people believe that the Republicans are not necessarily gun grabbers. Oh, it's from the full Judiciary Committee. So I guess whoever was on there. It looks like a Democrat bill there in Connecticut. And I'm not a fan of Republicans at all. In fact, I think they're all just terrible. But this bill, House Bill 7219, it already had a hearing last week. It would ban guns without serial numbers and regulate those which are sold in a form requiring the purchaser to finish assembly, or that are homemade or 3D printed. Again, they want to prevent you from having something that they can't detect. Undetectable firearms are bad to government people. What did the NRA have to say about this? I thought this was really interesting to read this. So they put out at the NRA ILA, the Institute for Legislative Action. Of course, they send out alerts and they post it on their blog, nraila.org, all the updates on hearings and bills that are being considered. And there are a lot of bad bills in Maryland, for example, on the right to keep and bear arms. Not surprising at all. But they also included this House Bill 740, the 3D printed firearm bill that just passed the state house yesterday. And they talk about it. Sponsored by Delegate Kathleen Dumais, establishes certain crimes related to the criminal possession or manufacture of 3D printed firearms and ghost guns. So they're saying, we oppose this. Good. I'm really glad to hear that they're opposing that. But it's interesting what it looks to me is their reasoning. They talk about how there's no reports of criminals using 3D printing to manufacture firearms. That's the first thing that they say. There are no reports of criminals using 3D printing to manufacture firearms. The Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms, and Explosive has never received a trace request for a 3D printed gun. Now, they're not mentioning that the BATF or the ATF shouldn't exist, because it shouldn't. Under the Constitution, the only thing it is authorized to do is disband. They also empower government that it's like they're suggesting that as long as criminals use these things to manufacture firearms, that it would be okay to ban it. I don't know if they're going to take that position in the future, but they're starting out by saying it's not needed. That's really what they're telling us. It's not needed. You shouldn't have to pass this. And maybe it's a strategic ploy on their part to say, look, this is pointless. Don't waste your time on passing this, even though it was probably very easy in Maryland for them to just press a button or raise their hand and you get 94 votes to say, yes, we're going to ban these. But I don't like their approach on this. They just say that it's not needed. There's no reports of crimes with it. Of course, now we have just a couple of weeks later that there was this big crime ring busted. So now does the NRA have to change their tune? If you start out with a bad principled stand, then you always have to change your argument based on the situation. I understand strategic approaches, but I also believe, like what Thomas Jefferson wrote to James Madison after passage of the Kentucky Resolutions of 1798, that you should always hold to the principles that you believe in, your ultimate principles, even if you have to take step-by-step approaches to it. He said, we should push as far as events will render prudent in regards to the Alien and Sedition Acts of 1798. So in my view, even if you are taking a strategic approach on this, talking about how, like, look, okay, no, this is a waste of your time. Look, we don't think you should ban it at all. They don't seem to include that type of message here. But of course, I have this link and all of our links in the show notes, which you can find over at 10thamendmentcenter.com/goodmorningliberty, all spelled out. Again, 10thamendmentcenter.com/goodmorningliberty. Chris Branco over on YouTube says the Rhode Island Constitution, and this is really interesting because this is what I often miss out on. I haven't done any of the research, but he looked this up. He said Section 22, right to keep and bear arms, or right to bear arms. And then it says the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. Now, Chris, you could tell me, and maybe anybody else could look this up, Section 22 of the Rhode Island State Constitution, do they have a but? Does it have a comma after shall not be infringed? Except in cases of the government not being able to detect, or having too many bullets, or being able to fire too quickly, or being too large of a caliber. It doesn't say but. So they're just totally ignoring two constitutions. They don't care what it says in the federal. They certainly don't care what it says in the state. And that's really bad news. Scott Lashua says the problem with the politicians is there's no consequences. And I think the lack of consequences is that so many of our neighbors have a horrible view of liberty and the power of government. And we've got a lot of work to do here at all. And Dennis Marburger says the 3D gun bill ban is an attack on the natural right to own private property. Absolutely. It's not like, I mean, if you stole it, if someone prints it and you go steal it, you should be convicted for the crime of theft or breaking an entry, whatever it may be, but not for owning, buying a product and making something. Andrew Zakowski, I apologize if I say your name, Pennsylvania Constitution, Article 1, Section 21. Dennis says in Michigan, Article 1, Section 6, every person has a right to keep and bear arms for the defense of himself and the state. Chris Branco, no comma in the Rhode Island Constitution. Not surprised by that at all. So they go on, NRA goes on, and they talk about this a little more. And they say, furthermore, the 1968 Gun Control Act, the 1988 Undetectable Firearms Act. Now, I didn't know about the Undetectable Firearms Act until the Defense Distributed thing became kind of a big news thing last year. And I did a whole show on this on YouTube a few months back as well that you can look. I should have included that in the links, but I apologize for not. The 1988 Undetectable Firearms Act and other federal laws govern firearms produced by a 3D printing process, just as they do guns manufactured through conventional processes. So the NRA is telling us here, look, there's no need for this because it's not being used by criminals. And that tells me that people are going to use that as an argument once it is being used by criminals. Then they're saying the ATF has just never detected it, which empowers the ATF to be doing trace requests. I don't want the ATF to do anything. I want them to go home and get a job rather than violating people's rights. And then they say, oh, well, you know, there's no need for this. I mean, they don't say there is no need for this. That's how I am reading it. And if you think I'm a jerk for doing it, that's too bad, because that's what I see. Furthermore, the Gun Control Act and the Undetectable Firearms Act already do this. It's pointless. We already have federal laws on the books. Mind you, oh, this is going to be good. Okay, let's go to this one other statement from last year. Chris W. Cox. What was the date on this? July 31st, 2018. And again, we're talking about the Undetectable Firearms Act of 1988, which the NRA is validating in its opposition to a 3D gun ban in Maryland. So oppose the gun ban, oppose the 3D printing gun ban, but don't validate a federal law at the same time. The Gun Control Act of 1968 also shouldn't exist. So Chris Cox, this is the executive director of the NRA. This is just some blogger. NRA ILA, I'm sorry. That's Chris Cox. He says, many anti-gun politicians and members of the media have wrongly claimed that 3D printing technology will allow for the production and widespread proliferation of undetectable plastic firearms. Regardless of what a person may be able to publish on the internet, undetectable plastic guns have been illegal for 30 years, now 31. Federal law passed in 1988, and I highlighted this for those of you watching, crafted with the NRA's support, makes it unlawful to manufacture, import, sell, ship, deliver, possess, transfer, or receive an undetectable firearm. The National Rifle Association, it seems to, often boasts of the gun control measures that they have passed. Now, a few years ago, when Obama was in office and we were working very hard to get bills passed to nullify federal gun control, back in 2013 and 2014, we had a lot of effort on this. Unfortunately, a lot of Republicans have stepped aside with the NRA-backed president and Republicans holding Congress. But the NRA actually opposed us aggressively, mostly behind the scenes. in Missouri, Arizona, Florida, and elsewhere. My buddy Andrew Nappy, who was running our Florida chapter at the time, man, he had so much pushback from the NRA affiliate in Florida. Now, the former NRA affiliate leader in Kansas was actually very supportive of this effort, but they were actually the top opposition to efforts to nullify federal gun control. And maybe it's because so many of them were passed by the NRA. That's a whole nother show. And I did a show on that a few weeks ago. Who's to blame for more federal gun control? And I think it really is all of us who turn a blind eye and say, well, I'm not going to oppose this one. But again, they're bragging about the fact, and maybe it's not a brag, but it's clearly factual. Here it is, the executive director of NRA-ILA saying, look, this stuff is already illegal, and the law was crafted with the NRA support, as if that makes it okay. If the National Rifle Association says this gun control measure is needed, why would people fall in line with the gun control measure rather than tearing up their membership cards? I can't understand that. I mean, people should tear up the membership card of the 10th Amendment Center. And I see a bunch of people who are members here, and I really appreciate this. If TAC starts supporting more federal power over stuff that is supposed to be reserved to the states or the people, you should, if I drive this organization in the wrong direction, I would appreciate you reaching out to me, team@10thamendmentcenter.com, and say, you know what, you suck on this. You're doing it wrong, or your blogger is doing this wrong, whatever it may be. And if we do not respond in the right way, you tear up your membership card. That's how it's supposed to go. I mean, unless we're doing so many other good things, like if we're like 95%, I'm not saying you should agree with every approach we take. I guess I shouldn't encourage people to stop financially supporting us, because as you can see, I'm doing this from a bedroom. And so does Mike Meharry. He does this from a spare room in his apartment or in his house in Kentucky. And Dave Benner and TJ Martinell, we're all working from home as we do this. So I guess I should be careful with what I'm saying. And for those of you who want to join in, I might as well make an advertisement here. It's 10thamendmentcenter.com/members. 10thamendmentcenter.com/members. Alltop says, I'm a contributor. Am I do any stickers? Feel free to email us at team@10thamendmentcenter.com. I'll look it up. We do have we don't have a lot of stickers often, but we do have some in stock right now. So I'll see if I can drop some into the mail for you. Thank you for asking. So someone else says, Anna says NRA is a form of controlled opposition. Someone was talking about how they've been pushing things, these red flag laws. And my friend Chris Ann Hall, I know she's been doing a lot of work on the red flag bills. I have not, but I do see that Marco Rubio has a bill. I believe it was Rubio. Wouldn't surprise me. I mean, maybe it isn't, but it wouldn't surprise me if the neocon Marco Rubio had a bill that would incentivize states to pass these types of things. There is something pending. So, again, the Undetectable Firearms Act of 1988 was pushed and passed with NRA support. And again, the right to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed unless the government doesn't know you have a gun. That's the NRA's position as of July 31st, 2018. I hope they recant. TJ Martinell wrote a follow-up on this, and he's done a lot of great writing for us, especially on the right to keep and bear arms, and pressing the fact that it is a natural right, not a Second Amendment or a government-granted right. And he wrote this in just a few weeks later. We published on August 12th. Last year. And he said, the Second Amendment's text isn't hard to read, and it takes all sorts of legal somersaults to get around the shall not be infringed part. It's pretty straightforward. So it's confusing and ironic when a national gun rights lobby like the NRA comes out in favor of unconstitutional federal gun control again. And then he kind of goes into really hitting them on this Undetectable Firearms Act statement of 1988 that came out last summer. But he says, interestingly, and I think this is some interesting history, he did an entire multi-article series on how British gun control led to the American Revolution. And he says, interestingly, the notion that undetectable weapons should be banned or restricted led to shooting between Redcoats and Minutemen at Lexington and Concord. He said local militia had amassed arms and munitions, and the British knew these arms could pose a threat if fighting broke out. To remove that possibility and solidify British dominance over the colonists of Massachusetts, General Gage, that pig, General Gage sent a detachment to retrieve or destroy those stores of munitions and weapons. Now, it's not a 3D printed gun, but it's basically guns that they didn't want you to be able to hide and have for self-defense. They don't like that. They don't like that. They never have. And the powers that be, the deep state, the gun grabbers, whatever you want to call them, it doesn't matter. They don't like people being able to defend themselves and being self-reliant. TJ goes on, he says, gun grabbers want to restrict undetectable, and he puts that in quotes, undetectable weapons that make it impossible to track who owns what for the same reasons. Because if you can defend yourself, then it is much harder for them to dominate the population. And he concludes with this statement, which is actually the featured image for the episode today. If we adopted the attitude of the founders, all guns would be undetectable. And that bears repeating. If we adopted the attitude of the founders, all guns would be undetectable. This is a stance that all gun rights groups should endorse. Again, this gets back to the message that I was trying to share earlier. We do not have a Second Amendment right. We don't have a gun permit that came out in 1791. We're human, so we own ourselves, and therefore we have a natural right to defend ourselves. Just like we have the natural right to defend ourselves in an argument or have thoughts or have property. Of course, the communitarians, the socialists and all these, the statists of various stripes from left to right and in between, they don't like individual liberty. They don't like it on plants. They don't like it on self-defense. They don't like it on raw milk. They don't like it on anything. Stop encouraging government to control what people own, even on things that you don't even want to own. Because that is always one of the first things that I hear. Oh, okay, Bolden, so you drink raw milk. Well, that's dangerous. I don't want to do that. Okay, great. Don't. I don't own a firearm. And I mean, I grew up in a socialist city, Milwaukee. We had a socialist mayor. I grew up with the mentality that it was the cops that were going to protect us. We know that they don't. You're not going to, like, if someone is trying, especially the people who are least capable. Think of an elderly woman, for example, or an elderly man. And if someone tries to aggress against them, can you imagine them pressing their button, help, I'm falling, I can't get up? They can't defend themselves. So it is absurd to think that government is going to protect you from criminals. They may sometimes, it's a whole nother show, self-ownership and things like that. Again, we don't want people to be criminalized for what they own. It really is what they do or don't do to other people. I mean, you can't require people to do stuff to other people, but hopefully this makes sense. And I hope you guys found this interesting, insightful, educational, all that stuff. I appreciate everyone who's been joining me in the live chat. It looks like the live chat app at Restream is not working for some reason, but I do see some live chats coming in over on YouTube as well. Anna Reyes, cops are not even legally obligated to protect us. Tyler B, I exist, so I have a right to defend my existence. That sounds right. Justin Bayola talks about marriage. Just to get married, you have to pay a tax and wait 3 days. They use tax. The power to tax is the power to destroy. So as soon as you have to get a license, as soon as you have a tax act or a stamp, like it sounds like a stamp act, this is going to discourage that activity. Again, thank you so much for spending some time with me. Wherever you're watching or listening, smash the like button. Keep leaving some comments. Feel free to email me over at team@10thamendmentcenter.com. Share the link to the video. If you're listening on iTunes, Spotify, Google Play, wherever, the podcast version, leave a rating. That helps a lot. All these platforms are very easily triggered. And the more of these basic actions you take, free, the more it tells those platforms to show the program to other people. So again, thank you for spending some time with me. Again, we'll be back again on Friday, as we are every Monday, Wednesday, Friday, 9:30 a.m. Pacific time here at the 10th Amendment Center. Have a great Wednesday, and we'll see you next time.